Alright, so when we're doing all these October videos, they usually end up being like some pretty dark movies and like kind of really deep into that horror, so I kind of wanted to throw something into the mix that was a little lighter, and this is what came to mind, where it was like, it was gonna be, well, why don't I just, talk about these two movies? But then I remembered how much I hate Teen Wolf 2, and then I was thinking, like, I guess it could be kind of a versus thing, which is what we typically do with this kind of thing, so I guess that's kind of what it's gonna be. I'm gonna basically talk about why I think the first movie is, fun and works in certain ways, and, for its time, and why Teen Wolf 2 might be one of the worst movies ever made. I don't know. And I kind of thought, like, because I hadn't seen Teen Wolf 2 since the first time I saw it, which was probably 20-something years ago. And this was the first time I've rewatched it. And I was like, surely it couldn't be. And, I was like, probably a child the last time I saw it. And I know it has a bad reputation, but maybe it's not as bad as what I'm remembering. But then I realized, oh, I don't really remember anything about it except my hatred I felt for it. And then it kind of came back, and it was like, okay, I think I can get why it's so bad, but I'm also getting ahead of myself. So, let's go ahead and talk about the first movie, which came out as Michael J. Fox was taking over the world, because Family Ties was going on, and then he shot this like on a break from Family Ties, and Back to the Future was in there as well. This and Back to the Future came out like less than 2 months apart, if I remember correctly. One of them was July, and one of them was like the end of August. I think Back to the Future was first, and then this. And both ended up being hits, even though Back to the Future may possibly be one of the best movies ever made, and Teen Wolf seems pretty slight by comparison, which I think was where a lot of the criticisms when it first came out probably were coming from quite a bit. But when you look at it, yeah, it's this sort of, puberty allegory of this guy who goes to high school and is also dealing with secretly turning into a werewolf with all these things he doesn't quite understand going on. He's getting hair in places, he's liking girls and all that. And what's interesting about it is it's about half an hour in when he first starts when we actually see a full transformation. So for the first half hour, it's basically just a teen movie. It's like a teen comedy with just these little elements of, oh my god, I have hair on my hands, or oh my god, I have claws. But everything else that's happening is like full teen comedy. And it is interesting to make it like this sort of hereditary thing, so he doesn't go through the whole process of he runs into a werewolf, he gets bit, it becomes that whole thing. And not only does it start with him already having werewolf symptoms and it being in his blood, but the fact that it changes the rules, where there's a lot of rules that we know about werewolves that don't apply to this. So, so it's basically just, a teen comedy where he turns into a wolf, and there's not even really any particular darkness in it, with the exception of, like, one or two random bits, like, right in the middle. But, yeah, to start off, he's, a kid who's looking for change, and of course he's getting it, in a really big way. He doesn't realize that it's kind of already happening. So we have the moment where he, like, he asks a girl out, but then something embarrassing happens where he grows hair. And, he's on the basketball team, but they lose terribly. Like, they have a whole reputation for losing. Their score is, like, 71-12 in that game that we see. And, there's a whole subplot going on at the beginning where Styles is trying to get beer, which would be in sort of any teen comedy from the 80s. And, like, we focus on the girls in his life. He's got the girl that's always been there, that's, like, his best friend, and the unobtainable one that he wants. Who is also, the girlfriend of his rival on the basketball court. That douchebag Nick. So, with all of this going on in the first half hour, that in itself is basically its own movie. Like, the whole thing about Styles trying to get beer has a whole arc and payoff before anything else in the movie has happened, where there's a whole quest for him to get this keg for this party, and then that payoff where there's like already 6 kegs and it doesn't matter that he got one. And he's just treated very passively after this big mission to be the person that brought the keg. Which is really an interesting play in general on that cliche of the guy who wants to be cool, so brings beer to the high school party. So it kind of turned that on its head in an interesting way, and just kind of adding, when I say there's a fun vibe to this movie, a lot of that is credited to his friend Styles, which is really interesting because this is a character that I feel like in any other 80s teen comedy would be super annoying. The character that every time he's on screen is just so grating, and you'd rather be watching anything else when this character is on screen. But he's really such a life to this movie. Like when the whole sequence where he's riding on top of the van, and when he's like basically taking over a certain corner of the party, and you watch him and it's like, this is a character that could have been such a throwaway character, but he's so interesting because despite his boisterous personality, he's actually quite likable. And I think what makes him so likable is, especially when we see him at the party, it's like, this is a guy who could like find his place anywhere. Like, he walks into the party with the keg, and the guy says, oh, there's already, like, 6, whatever, just, we might use it. And you would think, oh, now he's dejected, he feels like a loser, but the next time we see him, I guess he's basically commandeered a whole section of this party, and is, like, running the show. And it's so, like, his energy's, like, contagious to both us watching it and the movie itself. He's a surprisingly big aspect of this, like a big asset to this movie. And then the stuff, and of course, you know, Michael J. Fox, there's a reason he was taking over the world at this point in time, where he has his charm also. Not, I don't, I almost want to say he might be overshadowed by Styles at times. Because he's a character that does kind of have to go through the protagonist emotions of, you know, having the girls and the basketball and all that stuff. But still, like I said, it's like, you know, this sort of puberty allegory and stuff like that. There's a fun quality to it, and like a sort of over-the-top quality to it, which is appealing. But then, yeah, about half an hour in, we do get our first full transformation, and this is another moment, sort of like the keg moment, where it turns your expectation on its head a little bit, where you see this play out and you think, oh, he's going to have to hide this from his dad, starting with his dad and then everybody else, and then both of those get turned on their heads very quickly. So that moment where he opens the bathroom door and his dad is also a werewolf, is this moment where it's like, you feel like the movie is so far ahead of you as an audience member, when for a movie, like I said, this sort of light, it's surprising in a few ways. And that really adds to the appeal also, and how it's revealed, like, where, you know, there's different rules and stuff like that, and it's hereditary and all that. And it's interesting to watch the dad character, because obviously he's very likable in this moment. There's also the moment where Boof, his best friend slash potential girlfriend and love interest, comes over, and her and his dad are just playing basketball while he's like going through it over here. And there's this moment where like the dad's like one of those characters you feel like is everybody's friend. And to my understanding, I was reading that when the writers were looking for a director for this movie, they were asking the directors, like, what do you think this movie's about? And they were saying, like, you know, plot points, or talking about the werewolf aspect or whatever. And the director that got this, his answer was, it's a story about a father and a son. And that's what they were looking for. I don't know how much that comes through in the finished product, but I like the idea of that being the foundation of the story. So, and when you look at that kind of being at its core, it has this sort of, you know, emotional factor that's not too overbearing, or doesn't try to take over the movie too much, or try to kill the fun vibe too much. It's just this sort of wholesome thing that's kind of at the center of this comedy. And so when you look at the werewolf aspect, and I was talking about how it doesn't really have a particular darkness in it, despite the werewolf quality in it. The idea of he turns into a werewolf in public on the basketball court in front of a crowd, and everybody just goes with it, and it makes him popular. It's another thing where it's like it's just this sort of go the opposite direction of what you typically see in werewolf stories. And looking at it as a comedy, it's just a funny concept that that everybody just goes with it. It's just a thing, and everybody's immediately like, okay, he's a werewolf, that's the thing, and we can move on now. And then he ends up being super popular, of course. And now this is when, from a story standpoint, it gets interesting to talk about, because the whole center of this story is he gets popular, he has this big rise, he becomes beloved, and then he starts showboating, he starts sort of alienating his friends and alienating his teammates. Everybody it starts to feel bitter towards him. He starts abandoning the people that care about him, chasing this fame that he never saw when he was just normal and not a werewolf. And everything I just said, that gigantic piece of the story is one montage. This is like this movie is like storytelling by way of Rocky IV. It's like a whole chunk of the movie is one montage. And then when we're on the other side of that montage, it kind of feels like we're tying things up already. So, yeah, he goes through the period where he has to realize, oh, do I want to be the werewolf or do I want to be me? And it's better to just be me, and stuff like that. And that's basically the arc. Like, that's the final place. But we've got a few threads going on here. There's the dance which feels like its own climax. And then, but it's still got plenty to go from there, because we still have the play. And then we have the big basketball game, which is the actual climax. If I were to say which of these is one thread too many, I think it's definitely the play. Like, if you cut the play aspect out of this movie, I don't think anything would really change. And it's his initial connection to the unobtainable girl whose name I've forgotten, Nick's girlfriend. But even that goes. This is like the closest we get to the dark directions the movie could go. The movie doesn't really draw any other attention to it, so maybe I'm misremembering. Correct me if I'm wrong. Is there a moment at the bowling alley where Mick implies that he killed Scott's mother, and for some reason that's never mentioned again? Am I imagining that? Is my memory, like, are my wires crossed? Because there's that, and then there's the follow-up scene where we've already seen Scott, bang her in the dressing room, and there appears to be a shift here where she's left Mick behind and she's Scott's girlfriend now. And then he's dropping her off at home and she's like, no, Mick's still my boyfriend. This wasn't even anything. Like, she's basically pretending the entire thing didn't happen. And that's actually kind of psychotic. So, her and Mick are characters. Like I said, if I'm remembering or not the mom thing, what happened to his mom and Mick's potential involvement in that, it's like these two characters are kind of psycho in this movie, like, in this one section, and then it just goes back to Mick's his rival on the basketball court, and that's it. I don't know, but that's that's what the movie is. It's very slim. It's a very paper thin movie. But I feel like it's it's interesting how famous and popular, how much of a hit this movie is and was, when you look at how incredibly paper thin it is, especially the fact that it was always being compared to Back to the Future because they came out around the same time. But yeah, you know, if you just need something, you know, simple and light and fun, it's very cheesy. It's very 80s. Things haven't aged well. I was saying all those great things about Styles. Styles is homophobic. That's I try not to hold it against him because he's in an '80s comedy. Yeah, it's very light. It feels like a movie that it's one of the most barely existing popular movies that I can think of. But it's fine. You know, I've come back to it a couple of times, and yeah, so it's just, you know, a nice movie that exists. It's just another sort of '80s comedy that makes some interesting decisions and turns some things on its head in some surprising ways, and has some surprisingly likable characters throughout it. Um, None of this is fucking Teen Wolf 2 is it's Teen Wolf 2. It has its own reputation. So ask Jason Bateman about it. He loves to talk about it. So here's the thing. So if ever there was a movie, a sequel specifically, that makes it as obvious as they could possibly make it that they could not get the lead actor back, and they had to write around it, they barely, barely wrote around it. So Todd, I think is his name. Jason Bateman's character is Scott's cousin. So apart from that, this character is basically Scott. So that's all that's really going on here, because his friend is he's friends with Chubby. Mark Holton is back. He's driven to college by Harold, Scott's dad, his uncle, who takes us through some exposition. Styles is his friend. And there's like one throwaway comment from Chubby where he says, like, you know, we love Howard, I think might have been their last name. We love the Howard family, is what they say. So it almost feels like he's robbing, like Todd is like performing identity theft on Scott. That's what this movie feels like, as establishing the characters. There's even another coach character, where the coach was actually kind of funny and likable in the first movie, where he was, you know, he's like saying, you know, like, hey, this place, you know, you can come here with anything you want, even if it's not about, you know, basketball. You can come to me, and he's having KFC and doing the whole thing, and goes on tangents and all that, and it's funny, it's charming. This coach, they're trying to do the same thing with, but he just rambles absently, and it's just weird and awkward. It kind of feels like he might be, like, maybe there's medication he's not taking or something. I don't know. It's a weird vibe with this coach, but you can tell what they're trying to do when you look at the previous coach. So there's that. And this movie's just walking into holes constantly, just right away. Let's look at John Astin's first scene, where he's the dean of the college, and it's an '80s movie, so he's gonna be the, you know, the big villain that says, I'm gonna kick you out of school and play by the rules and whatever the fuck else. And there's a moment here where there's the nervous guy, and the dog, and it's a running thing that this dog just threatens everybody. And it's, maybe I'm blowing this particular thing out of proportion, but it just feels like an omen when you look at the rest of the movie and you realize this is one of the first scenes. And the whole thing is that the dog intimidates everybody. Everybody's scared of the dog. But the first couple of cuts to the guy sitting next to the dog, he looks like he's trying not to laugh, like he's smiling. And then in the rest of the scene, he seems kind of distressed and scared of the dog. So it's like, did the movie begin with them using the wrong takes for those shots? I wouldn't think anything of it, but the rest of the movie is so poor, it makes me wonder if a mistake that egregious was made. So there's that. Even before that, it starts with a mistake. The opening credits feel very somber. It's a sequel to Teen Wolf. The opening credits feel very melancholy and almost creepy. where these angelic voices are singing the school's, like, anthem, like, slowly, and it sounds like a funeral march or something. Very telling for the movie itself, but I don't... What a vibe to start with for Teen Wolf 2. Like, what... So, there's that, and then it's basically... It almost feels like the movie is talking to itself a lot. Like, there's a moment where Aston says... It's like, I think it's right after he transforms completely for the first time, and he makes a mess of things. And Aston comes over and he says, if this is some kind of joke, you'll notice I'm not laughing. And it's like, that's exactly what I've been thinking for half an hour, man. Like, you can't even tell, really, when the movie's trying to be funny, unless it's doing something really over the top. Like physical comedy in this movie. There's a scene I forgot to mention in the first movie that's fantastic. It's this great bit of physical comedy. And it's a full shot, so you can tell it's like Michael J. Fox really doing it. Where he has to run down a hallway that's just been mopped. And it was apparently a very over-the-top mopping for comedy purposes, because the hallway is very, very wet. And he basically slides down this hallway without completely losing his balance, but almost losing his balance. And we see him go all the way down. The camera stays on it. We see him go all the way down the hallway, almost losing his balance and slipping and almost dancing down the hallway. And it's a fantastic piece of physical comedy. The physical comedy in Teen Wolf 2 is food being catapulted into a person's face, or a dead frog fight where they're throwing dead frogs at each other in science class. You see the difference here. Like, I know, like, I'm not knocking, like, the pie fight at the end of The Great Race or something like that. There's a place for it, but it just feels, when the rest of the movie feels so lowbrow and lazy, and, like, no sort of clever thought was put into it, you're not going to have the physical comedy that Michael J. Fox is capable of in these cases, so it all feels so mediocre by comparison. And you look at the character Todd as well, because obviously Jason Bateman's like one of my favorite people now, and has been for some time. I think it was when Arrested Development was like his like big comeback, and then, you know, like Juno was in there, and then he's just been up here ever since. So it's hard to, if you only know the Jason Bateman post Arrested Development, it might be hard to imagine he could be this unengaging. So, especially since he was so engaging at this age otherwise. Like, look at his Johnny Carson appearances. Like, he always had that factor. There's a reason he was famous at this age. Just this movie in particular does not do anything to highlight any of the qualities they had at the time. So there's a moment where he and his new love interest, whose name I really don't remember, I barely remember the character, because she's basically just there to act like she's not interested in him and then be interested in him, and which is the confusing thing here. Here's what I'm getting at. They're walking along, they're doing their, oh, we're going to be love interest thing, and he's saying, you know, I'm a science fair champion, and my research is in crustacean reproduction. And she says, like, you know, oh, that sounds exciting. She's very sarcastic about how boring he is. So, if his love interest is actively bored with him, what the fuck are we supposed to think? And maybe that's a quality where it's like, oh, he gets more interesting when he's the wolf. He's boring now, but he's going to be interesting later. But even before we even go into the wolf thing, there is a line later that's baffling, where we've already gone through the whole arc of he's boring, then he's the wolf, he's exciting, everybody loves him, but then he's alienated. It's the same fucking arc. Then he alienates everybody, he gets too cocky, etc. So then we get to a point where the girl's talking to him, and she says, if I'm not mistaken, her quote is, "I never thought I'd say this, but I miss the old Todd." So she's mad because she likes him, and he's been off, fucking various women in wolf form, which is a whole can of worms we don't have to go into. Um, so when when she says that, she seems to be implying, I never thought I'd say this, I miss the old Todd. So she never thought she'd miss him the way he was? Am I reading too much into this? Or is this imply that she genuinely thinks he's boring, but she's also pissed off when he's the wolf? Yet she's in love with him, and that's why she's upset. I don't... How are we supposed to feel anything for this character when I don't think the characters even know? I guess is the point I'm making. But yeah, then it gets very... You can see every line here where, he gets... It gets itself in circles. Because he becomes the wolf, and they don't like him at first because it's at, like, this party. They don't know that it helps him box better. Yeah, it's boxing now instead of basketball, which was an interesting choice. It's not exactly he can't exactly show off the physical prowess in the same way. Yeah, so everybody's put off by him, and he's called a dog. And so there's like 3 scenes in a row here where he's sulking saying, "They called me a dog. I'm a dog now. They called me a dog. They don't like me because I'm a dog." That's like 3 scenes in a row we get that. And then we get the moment when he boxes and then he becomes popular because now he can play a sport better. So, as the wolf. So then he becomes popular for superficial reasons. As I said, we go through the same beats. Alienation, cockiness, all that. Getting behind in school. Disappointing Kim Darby, who's in this for some reason. But then we get a moment here. Okay, so I was talking about the montage in the first movie that basically took up a lot of the movie. Like, it told a lot of the movie's story through one montage. So it's like, okay, are we going to have the decency to fast forward through this movie too? But the thing about it is, we get stuck in one scene because there's a whole song and dance number to Do You Love Me that he performs. It's clearly not Bateman's voice, but the character Todd performs it. And it's a whole actual number. Like, it's not just, him singing. It's like it's a whole choreographed dance number, and they go through the whole song. It's like a scene out of Grease 2 or something. And so you think, okay, that was our filler moment. Okay, so now the movie can be the movie and be on its merry way. No. We get the song and dance number for all that filler, the length of the whole song. Actually, Do You Love Me is a pretty short song. I feel like it's only like 2.5 minutes. I think they made it longer. Because I think this sequence feels a lot longer than 2.5 minutes. And then, after this, we still get a fucking montage. And a long one. So, the whole section, a whole middle portion of this movie is a song and dance number followed by a montage. So, this movie is basically I was talking about how paper thin the first movie is. This movie has like 15 minutes of material and an hour and 34-minute runtime. So we get all of that whole thing. And shock surprise, Chubby gets bitter again. Everybody goes through the same beats. Styles might as well barely be here. Like, he also kind of gets bitter. They also changed his actor, which, first of all, is blasphemy in itself. But he's just also has none of the charm. He's just a character that just exists in this movie. Whereas, the Styles of the first movie almost took over the movie. No, he barely exists here. So, and then he goes on a very, very long apology tour. So, here's the problem. Here's where it becomes maybe one of the worst movies ever. Because the worst movies, we've talked about this a lot on this channel over the many years. The worst movies that exist aren't, really over-the-top bad movies. Those movies that you talk about with your friends and you talk about how, oh my god, do you believe how insanely bad this moment was, or how insanely bad that was, or this performance, or this piece of writing, or whatever it is. Those are not the worst movies ever. The worst movies ever are the boring ones that you will never remember. The ones that are just a slog, just going in one ear and out the other, not existing, basically. We could if only we were so lucky that this movie didn't exist, but those are the worst movies to me, I think, because here's the thing, is the movie is not funny. It's a comedy that's not funny. So when your comedy is not funny, what are you left with? Are you going to get invested in the boxing? Or if he's going to stay in school? Because I swear to God, in the last 25 minutes, that's like a third of the movie. There's the beginning, there's the song and dance number / montage, and then there's this. This portion, which is basically a drama about a guy going to school. A very boring, lifeless, we don't give a shit drama about a guy going to school. Told mostly through, guess what? Montages. So it's one of the most sleepwalking movies that may exist. That's its problem. And then there's like there's still a large fraction of that 25 minutes or so that's just the boxing. When it's like, oh, what's going to be the conclusion here? Oh, he realizes it's better to be himself than to be the wolf? That sounds familiar. I think we saw that movie a couple of years ago, when the first one came out. Because it's the same goddamn character with a different name. And a different face. Because Michael J. Fox didn't want to do this movie. It was like, we'll name him Todd. We'll say he's a cousin. We won't change anything else. That's about it. There's not really even anything else to say. It's that much of a dead zone of a movie. It's like a dead... You go into those dead-end streets and you see the yellow sign where the road just literally ends. That's what we're looking at. Or, like, if you're out in, like, a desert area and you're, like, driving and then suddenly there's a cliff there and there's just nowhere else to go but down to just the depths of death. I think that's where Teen Wolf 2's hanging out. So that's what this movie is. So that's all I can really say. So, I mean, if we were looking at this from the Versus approach or something, you would say, so which one do you prefer? I think we're done here. So, if I remember correctly, these are being all shot out of order. So I think this is like we're still in the first week of October. We might be ending the first week of October. So after this is going to probably be another straight-to-video thing, and then we will continue on with all the different stuff we're going to be doing. The Stephen King stuff, the straight-to-video stuff, there'll be like a big new release thing. There's like another series. There's a lot of stuff coming, and you'll see it or not see it depending on how much you care. And that's what it's going to be. So until the next thing, that's it.